Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar and Facebook Live. It's brilliant to be with you all this afternoon. And I'm hugely privileged to have Dr. Andrew Bough with us again to do this particular seminar and webinar and live with us. We've got a really super exciting and in-depth topic. And some of you may have heard of the Blue Ocean strategy, and effectively what that is in a nutshell is being able to create our unique value proposition space in the marketplace. Now, coming out of COVID-19, coming out of the period of time we've been in, it's even more important now than ever in whatever organization we lead, whether that's in business, whether that's in politics, whether that's in a not-for-profit organization. We want to be able to lead with fresh strategy, with fresh thinking. So this afternoon's session is going to be a little bit more in depth than some of our sessions. We usually try and keep them to 20 minutes. This is going to be around 40 to 45 minutes. It's going to be in depth. If you've got to go, we're recording the session. We can send it to you afterwards. And any Q&As will be taken towards the end of the session. So if you put those into the chat, then we will answer those after we've actually finished the webinar itself, because we've got a lot of content to get through, so we won't be stopping as we get through, as we go through, sorry. So just for those that want to introduce ourselves that don't know us, I'm Dan Maudhub. I'm CEO of Wonderful Creative Agency. We take complex problems and we make them wonderfully simple. So what do we do? What does that mean? We build new technologies, we integrate technology platforms, we execute and deliver digital strategies. And I do a lot of work with Dr. Andrew Bough, who's going to be our main host this afternoon. Andrew, or Andy as I call him, is a CEO of the Bough Leadership Institute, has an incredible amount of experience in both the corporate marketplace and the NGO marketplace, being able to not only deliver on leadership strategies, but business growth strategies as well. So we're going to align this afternoon a lot of the work that we do at Wonderful with the work that Andy does, and we're going to give you a really lot of high value content. So I'm super excited about the session. So welcome, Andy.
Thanks very much, Dan. Really good to be with you. I'm looking forward to walking through this discussion with you.
Brilliant. So just to sort of tease you up with a question is, what is then, coming out of the COVID-19 period, coming into this new normal and all of this stuff we're talking about, what's the new formula for business?
Well, it's a new formula, but it's been around for a while, Dan, and it comes from the work of the marketing guru himself, Philip Kotler, who stood up in London some years back and said, here's something that I want you to all take away as a marketing mantra. He said it's CCDVTP. And he said, you've probably never heard of it before because I've just made it up. And then he went on to explain that it's about creating, communicating, delivering value to a specific target market at a profit. And I have to say, Dan, after studying marketing at a postgrad level, I think that really does put it in a nutshell, doesn't it? This idea that you've got to identify where you create value, you've got to work out who you're going to communicate that to, and you've got to define your target market and then do that in a profitable way.
I wish more startups and scale-up companies that come across the agency would buy into that straight away, because they get caught up in all sorts of weird and wonderful marketing thoughts and activities and latest trends and latest tools. But this is the real stuff. So this is great. I love it. So I think, moving on from that, how would you define marketing then? Yeah, you've given those overviews. How do you define marketing? What does it mean to you?
So when I think about marketing, I'm thinking beyond just the execution piece around corporate identity or branding. I want to come back a little bit from that, Dan. And first of all, talk about marketing means we need to define the market itself. Secondly, it's about doing a proper needs analysis within your markets, within the customer groups that make up that market, and even more specifically within the segments within those markets. Nowadays, we even talk in professional services about customer profiles or buyer personas. I think that's becoming really important. The other part of it is then understanding your value proposition. And this is something that you and I are going to talk about today. So on the one hand, it's identifying the specific needs, the pain points of the customer within the segment. And on the other hand, it's identifying your value proposition, your unique offering that will address that. And then I think the marketing piece is about the communication of that. How do we make sure that we are bringing in all the people in the organization, all of the touch points, and getting them to deliver on that so that there is buy-in across the organization? So what we're seeing, Dan, in the 21st century is a move from talking about a marketing department to a market-oriented organization. And that then means that everybody, you know, whether you're in parts or production or procurement or operations or finance, you're all seen as playing an integral role in delivering on the value proposition within that specific market segment. And then very importantly, playing a monitoring role to make sure that you deliver on that value that you identified in the first place.
Fair. Brilliant. I think as well, one of the things I want to comment on around that is how all of those 5 components need to operate in harmony. One, if you remove one of those out, you always have ineffective marketing. You always have ineffective strategies. And I think it's, you know, there's much fewer clients and contacts that I see that have all 5 of those operating at the same time. You know, often you focus on the tactics or you focus just on the communication part, and then you try and drill it up to value proposition. You know, they're not getting it, or you're looking and saying, listen, really define your market for me. Oh, well, anyone can buy this. So this product's a mass market product. And I always say, well, if you try and sell to everyone, you sell to no one, because you're literally just communicating one-way broadcast. So even defining markets, it sounds like it's so simple, but actually it's so valuable and important that you start at that place. So I love that. It's brilliant.
So we need to talk about this strategy for new business then, Dan, which has 3 elements and builds on what we spoke about earlier. This idea that we would identify who our key stakeholders are. Secondly, and very importantly, that we would determine what are the products and services and offering that we would deliver that would be different and unique. And that's where that blue ocean piece comes in. And then what we also need to think about is how we're going to be organized. So for me, blue ocean strategy is also about leadership. It's about culture. It's recognizing that you need to have the competencies and the processes and the systems in place to deliver on that. So, you know, I came to the world of leadership, Dan, through marketing. This was really interesting because I realized that ultimately, if we were going to be more effective as marketers, we needed to become better leaders. And that was how I began this journey of trying to see the integration between the two. And of course, when you get to that point, you then end up really thinking about how do you create strategy to do that. So let me start with the first piece, which is the stakeholder question. And I think what's important here in the new world of marketing is, and we've already touched on this, is it's about identifying the markets you want to play in, but also the segments within those markets and the customers that are part of those segments and the unique needs that are defined there. Now, that might not look like anything new, but I think what we are starting to see, Dan, and I'm sure you can see this in Wonderful as well, is that important role of segmentation is so critical. And so what we would argue is that not only do you need to identify where your market is and how it operates, but very importantly, you need to be thinking about where the key decision makers are. I'm sure, Dan, you've been in situations where when you work in particular sectors or even with clients, you may find that you're dealing with people who have a need but aren't necessarily the key decision makers. So that's a key step 1. I think the second stage then is looking at your customer profiles, who buys what. So that's step 2 and step 3, and then bringing that together into step 4 by combining both the customer and their purchase. And of course, we're not just talking about products here, we're talking about services, we're talking about offerings. And then moving into a deeper understanding, I think, of segmentation is where we get into why are people buying what they buy, and then looking for tribes, if you like, segments, similar customer groups, and then really doing some kind of checklist. So let me just stop there, Dan, and check with you whether that process makes sense. Of course, we're going at a rate of knots here on something that we could talk about for hours on segmentation. But the point I want to make here is you don't have a marketing strategy without effective customer segmentation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the nuances within those steps is that when we're talking about market mapping and structure and decision makers, you know, there's a few layers to that. So if we've got a local market and it's a geographical market or a physical market, you know, the decision makers are buying will be different to an online market. So it's actually understanding your market and your marketplace. So what is physical, what is virtual, what's a combination of both, and what the decision-making factors are within that. So decision makers are obviously people that are purchasing from you, but there's also factors that go within that. So if we're working at a C-suite level, they're often getting advice further down the corporate chain and saying, well, is this the right company to work with? Or what really are our needs? And so you're actually selling often to multiple people or multiple levels or layers within an organization. And so, you know, that's in a traditional sort of face-to-face environment. What does that mean online? So I won't go into too much detail, but when you get into stage 2 and step 2 and 3, you've often got who buys and what's bought. Yep, that's fine, purchasing. But it's also what else could they be buying? You know, what is the competition that is out there? I'm not going to go into it now, but we look at market segmentation online. There are another few layers to look at as well. And then in stage 3, in our vernacular, in our world, we're looking a lot at the psychology behind it now. We're looking at why is it bought. So customers buy for 2 reasons fundamentally. One is they buy in their head or they buy with their heart. They buy emotionally, I really love that product or service, or I really need that product and service. So when we're looking at segmenting the market, why it's bought, what are the customer needs, you know, you're looking at it from a product perspective. You've also got to look at it from a brand perspective. You know, are we creating the right look and feel, the right head and heart process for the customer to say, I need that product? Yes, that's where it adds value. But where is that brand adding value? Am I in love with that brand? Do I want that brand? At the end of the day, if you were to ask someone, give me the top 3, 4, 5 brands that you remember, it's because you've had a personal, positive, emotional experience with them. You know, so there's a lot within that as well, of understanding the psychology, particularly coming into creating new normals and new business structures. The psychology of that becomes super important.
So I'm really glad that you've emphasized the fact that segmentation is not just about demographics, Dan, but it's also about psychographics,
Yes.
to use the term that, you know, we talk about. So in the online space, how you get into people's heads and understand their desires, their wishes, their pain points, I think is really important. When you've done that, you can then start to look at products and services and value propositions. I think the point I want to make here in terms of marketing strategy is often we start with the product without asking the marketing segmentation first. And if you haven't done that, this almost becomes, you know, putting the cart before the horse. So you can't determine value proposition if you haven't done market segmentation.
Absolutely.
And you can't determine blue ocean strategy if you haven't done your needs analysis, either at a demographic or a psychographic level. Dan, I don't know whether your viewers would have seen the value proposition canvas. There are a couple of canvases, and maybe we could do another session together on the business canvas, on value proposition canvas. These are open source tools, brilliant. And what I thought I could do is just show people a very simple method to showing the link between the customer needs on the right-hand side and the value proposition on the left, and trying to find that fit. Right. So ultimately, all of us, whether we're in professional services as I am, or you know, in media, or whether you're selling online, or whether you're selling something tangible, ultimately you want to identify what are the customers trying to get done in their work and in their lives. And typically they are either trying to create or gain some sort of a benefit, trying to make life easier, trying to become more efficient, or they're trying to reduce some sort of a pain, the negatives, the risks the customer wants to alleviate. So if you're a bookkeeping firm, you're trying to take away the pain from that entrepreneur of having to do all of the admin and the finance, and you're doing that for them, and you're charging them a premium because ultimately the benefit for them is that they can focus on other things. So that's on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side is this idea of what are the products and services that your value proposition is built around that's either going to achieve the customer gain, that would be the gain creators, or is going to alleviate the customer pain. So Dan, this is about thinking both from a customer point of view and a product and service point of view, and trying to find the fit between those two. And often when we talk strategy with new clients, having this conversation and having a visual representation of the value proposition, I think really helps, because sometimes customers don't know what they're looking for. They haven't necessarily quantified the benefits. They're not always aware of what those benefits might be, or they haven't really thought through the negatives or the risks or the pain that they're trying to alleviate in the first place. So I think part of value proposition can be about helping the client articulate the pain that they have that you're trying to address, or to really design and map out the key outcomes and benefits, and to do that collaboratively with them, and then say, all right, here are products or services that we offer that would be able to either alleviate those pains or help you to create those customer gains. Your thoughts on that approach, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, what I love about this, the VP canvas here, is that this works if you're in a startup environment, if you've got a dream or desire and you sort of want to get into a new business, or this works if you're a traditional 100-year-old company that's now got a load of disruptors and startups coming into the industry. And for 100 years, we've made widgets this way. And we always make widgets this way. We're the best widget company in the UK. And then your customers that are now a new set of customers say, so what? There's now 15 other companies that make widgets that way that are just as good as yours quality, and some of them are cheaper. So what's your value proposition now? What pain are you actually helping to relieve, or what gain am I getting by working with you? And you know, and Steve Jobs was brilliant, you know, in many ways in terms of understanding this. And he always said that you work from the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. So in other words, you work from the gain that the customer gets and you work back to the technology problems you're trying to solve. Then you've got the fit. And obviously he created the world's most valuable brand.
And what's really interesting, Dan, is it doesn't start with the price discussion. It starts with the value discussion.
Exactly.
And I think that's a very important conversation. What you see on the screen here is a metaphor that was developed by Seth Godin, another brilliant marketing guru. He wrote the book Purple Cow.
Yeah.
And again, Dan, it talks to exactly what you've just said. That unless you can identify your purple cow, that standout product, service, solution offering that would make you unique. And I think in many ways, when we get to the blue ocean strategy, you know, we've got a couple of metaphors going on today, Dan. Blue oceans, purple cows, but they all say the same thing. It's how are you going to stand out in a very busy market so that you're not just competing on price, but you are ultimately determining your differentiation. And so, Dan, for me, when we talk marketing strategy, and I have a new client that's trying to enter a market, I would ask them to quantify this for me. How are you different? Is it about superior product? Is it about innovation? Is it about the fact that the product itself is not superior but unique? Is it that you're building it purely on brand? So you have been effective in another sector or with another product line, and you're going to capitalize on that brand name. You know, we see many successful brands do that. Yeah. I'm thinking of Caterpillar, Dan, who were, you know, very successful in earth moving, and suddenly you find them in footwear. And you might say, well, what on earth do those two products have with each other? The answer is nothing, except that the association of brand you make with Caterpillar might be rugged, strong, durable in terms of earth moving equipment. That's a very easy translation into footwear. And it's a very interesting how you can capitalize on a very strong brand name, move into what might be a completely different market or market segment. Maybe your differentiation is around responsiveness, around speed of response or agility, or your ability to solve problems. Again, we haven't mentioned the price issue. I think too often, and particularly, even in this COVID period, Dan, people will be tempted in order to try and secure business at this time. The first thing they'll go to is to cost. And I'm not saying we shouldn't relook at our costs, but I'm saying we should do that by first of all considering value. Maybe your differentiation is the fact that you have a wider distribution coverage, or that you're a company like the one you mentioned in terms of Apple, which is committed to innovation.
Yeah.
But I think the question every entrepreneur, business owner has to answer right now is, why should I buy from you as opposed to someone else? And if your answer is only price, I think you have a pretty short life cycle there.
Absolutely. It's a race to the bottom. If you compete on price, you stack them high, sell them cheap, it's a race to the bottom. I think one of the major reasons that people compete on price is because they haven't clarified their value proposition or their position in the marketplace. So with your value proposition comes your actual positioning as well. And I think that when you haven't really defined that, not only internally, but actually communicated it via the marketing strategy you mentioned earlier, the only thing you've got to compete on is price. I'm either going to be cheaper, or I'm going to be quicker, or I'm going to be cheaper and quicker. And then ultimately, it really is a race to the bottom. And so many companies, I find themselves there after, they launch, they have an initial set of growth, they establish themselves as a business, and then they struggle. They struggle to scale, or they struggle to take it to the next level. And it's often because they haven't done the hard yards that you spoke about earlier on. And even if they did at the beginning, 3 years down the line, markets have changed, market segments have changed, decision makers have changed, purchasing decisions have changed, your competition has changed, particularly in a rapidly evolving global marketplace. The competition changes all the time. If you take this to an online environment, the competition around the search space, around the social media space, around the paid media, the advertising space online, creates so much competition that actually to have your blue ocean strategy in place is something you've got to not constantly, but you've got to consistently look at. So just give us a little bit more about the blue ocean strategy as a concept in itself.
Well, as somebody who teaches marketing, Dan, I can tell you it's been a game changer since the first book was published by Kim and Morborn in 2004. And I think in 2017-18 was voted as one of the leading management and leadership and marketing books ever. So that tells you something about how thought leaders are really embracing this. And I think in a post-COVID world, one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, as you look at this picture, is, are you going to jump left with everyone else or jump right? So if I look at my world, 10 years ago, very few people were doing virtual training and virtual delivery. The online space was relatively uncontested. And so we were, joining many of the market leaders in delivering training using online technology. Now, as I sit here today, July 2020, I would suggest, Dan, that I've got to rejig what I do, because, suddenly in the midst of the pandemic, everybody's offering everything online. And what was a blue ocean strategy 10 years ago is no longer. So you've really got to say to yourself, are you going to compete continually in the existing market? Whereas you say it's a race to the bottom, a race to beat the competition. You're going to only be able to exploit existing demands. You're having to make that price value cost trade-off. And you're going to align the firm on a strategy which asks you to choose around low cost or differentiation. So the blue ocean strategy says, well, let's try something different. Let's look for the uncontested market space. Let's make the competition irrelevant. And I say that cautiously. It's not that you don't do competitor analysis with the blue ocean strategy, but the reframing of that, Dan, is you're not trying to outpace or outbeat. You're taking a different direction. And that may be in terms of your product offering. It may be in terms of your marketing pitch. It may be in terms of your value proposition. But I think ultimately the key point is in this bottom right-hand block, where with the blue ocean strategy, you want the best of both worlds. You want to have your cake and eat it, where you're saying, we're going to look for differentiation, but we're also going to do that in a way which lowers costs. Now, traditionally, Dan, if you think about marketing, that's generally regarded as being almost impossible.
Yeah.
The blue ocean strategy gives you some practical tips on how to do that, which I think is important. We don't have a lot of time to go through all the principles, but I think it is about re-looking at your marketing boundaries. It's not just focusing on the numbers, but taking a big picture approach and looking beyond the existing demand, and then getting that strategic sequence right of marketing segmentation, value proposition, and delivering on that, rather than just coming up with a product that you're going to try and compete in an oversaturated market with. When you've done that, then it's about execution. It's about aligning the value, profit, and people propositions. That's where I talk about the market-oriented companies and continually look to renew those blue oceans. So I've got some examples, Dan, that we can look through, but let me just stop here and check if you have any thoughts on this idea of raising value and reducing costs and trying to do that at the same time, and the role that marketers would play in that process.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. It's a great overview as well of the blue ocean strategy, because it's such an amazing principle and set of techniques. I think that the value innovation is a really interesting one for business leaders to understand and get their minds around, because often it's not what we do, it's how we do it, or it's in the unique piece of the puzzle that we solve. And so, for example, in my industry, you know, I work in a hugely competitive industry, a digital industry in London, England. You know, the most competitive country for digital marketing, and you know, a very competitive industry. Now, we've been developing our own blue ocean strategy over the last while, where the value that we bring as an agency is being able to take complex problems and make them wonderfully simple. So what is a complex problem in our world is a technology problem, a lack of digital strategy, a lack of growth online, legacy systems that don't talk to each other. These are problems, to be honest, and most people don't want to solve. But we take those problems, and because of the process that we put into place, we can make them wonderfully simple. Now, wonderfully simple means that we can drive the cost, keep the cost low. We go into some quite big organizations. If they were to try and get a big four firm to come in and do some analysis, or trying to bring in a whole bunch of different consultants, they'd be paying 2, 3, 4 times the cost that they're paying us, because we can do the consultancy piece, the strategy piece, and the delivery piece within one framework. So it keeps the cost model simple. It keeps the cost low. That's an internal piece, but we're delivering, you know, immeasurably high value, because so the value is high, the cost is low. And also what it does is it eliminates the traditional barrier to entry questions. Well, I'm going to go to 3 suppliers to get this. With what we do, you cannot go to 3 suppliers. They do not do what we do in the way that we do it. So you can go and try and get a website, you know, proposal from another supplier, but we don't build websites. We'll integrate your data, your data, your digital marketing, and your web platforms into one solution that we can measure the growth. If you can find the same supplier that can do that in the way that we're doing it, for the cost base that we operate and the flexible cost structures we work with, then you've done well to find another 1 or 2. So I think the blue ocean strategy from a personal perspective is hugely important. The one thing I would say is that you've got to be committed. You've got to be committed to executing this strategy, because it's so much easier to go back to the red ocean and do what everyone else is doing, to create the me too. You know, so-and-so does that, me too, but I do it a little bit nicer, a little bit better. That's not a strategy. That's just a me too plan. So yeah, I love what you're saying. I think it's really good.
So Dan, let's talk about the 4 actions framework, and then I've got a couple of examples that we use in Blue Ocean. In the industry that you're trying to operate in, what are the factors that can be eliminated? What can we do less of? Where's the red tape, for example, that would make things smoother if we could eliminate that? What are the things that can be done to reduce certain things well below industry standards so that that makes you more effective. And then where are the things that you could raise, and where are the things that you may actually need to create new ideas? So this eliminate, reduce, raise, and create is a critical component of Blue Ocean strategy. And I wish we had more time just to talk through this, but what I thought I would do is just show a couple of examples, Dan. And the one that came to mind is a textbook one that we use on the Blue Ocean strategy, which is Gillette. So, here we are with a 1900 roundabout Wilkinson Pall Mall cutthroat. This is how, men of an age and era would shave. And if you think about that, Gillette comes along and they go, well, actually, we're going to develop a safety razor. And why are we going to do that? Because that you can see on the advert here, Dan, they talk about no stropping, no honing, language that some of us wouldn't be familiar with. But if we lay this out on a canvas, what we've got here is an offering, scores 0 to 10. We've got the price of the razor, the size of the blade, and then we've got safety issues and ease of use and maintenance and so on. So pink line is Gillette. They're very costly. They do last a long time. It has a forged blade, big size, but it's not safe. It's not that easy to use, and it's quite, cumbersome. So what Gillette comes along is they say, okay, let's eliminate all of this nonsense. We're not going to go for the big blade, the big life-lasting razor. We're going to get out of that. And what we're going to do is we're going to get into increasing safety, increasing ease of use, and what's going to make this a fashion item. Right there, you have a Blue Ocean strategy. Now, you might say, well, that was easy because they were able to walk into a market that, was relatively uncontested. But I would suggest, Dan, that up until that point, nobody had thought about shaving in the way that Gillette had. And by coming up with a strategy canvas that looks like this, they've identified the factors of competition, they've looked at the offering, and you now have a value proposition that means you can go to market and you can say, here's a blade, it's going to be a much smaller blade, it's going to be much easier to use, it's going to be maintenance free, and not only that, if you use our brand, you will be part of a more successful or more fashionable segment. So a practical example, a very powerful example. Another one very quickly, Dan, not an industry that we want to spend too much time on right now. I certainly wouldn't want to be in the airline industry at the moment, but at the time, Southwest Airlines looked at flying, and they said, well, typically you've got high prices, you've got expensive meals, fancy lounges. Let's do away with all of that. And what we'll do is we'll focus on friendly service and speed, and we'll increase the number of flights. So they too have gone for the eliminate and reduce, the raise and create, and again, you have a strategy. What they have done, in fact, is they have revolutionized the short-haul airline industry. So you can see the blue line of Southwest positions them very differently to where other airlines would be playing in terms of factors of competition. So let me just pause there, Dan, and just check whether that makes sense with you in terms of the eliminate, raise, reduce, create idea as part of this Blue Ocean strategy.
Yeah, I think I love that. And obviously those ideas that we're talking about there, or those examples, sorry, there's two things I wanted to say. One is both of those examples are not trying to create extra demand or become these fanciful, we're going to, they're not Elon Musk examples where we're going to take people to Mars. They're examples of people are shaving, we're going to give them a new and better way to shave. People are flying on airplanes, we're going to give them a different experience on those airplanes. And I think that often when we're looking at this sort of innovation or Blue Ocean strategy, you want to go to new products and services, and we're going to change the world, and you come up with these big fanciful ideas. Often it's not that. It's new ways of doing the same thing. It's more efficient ways what you're doing is you're drawing the market to you. You're drawing an audience away from the competition to you, and that therefore creating demand. And so I think that anyone can apply that. It could be a local.
Well, Dan, yeah. So what I've got here is an example. I did some work with the Association of Quantity Surveyors in South Africa, and they said to me, "Well, would this work for us?" And I said, "Okay, let's break down all of the touch points that quantity surveyors have to be involved with. So along the bottom there, I've got all kinds of things: tender documentation, monthly payments, assessing replacement values, providing legal disputes. And I then got them to rank each individual service provider on a score of 1 to 10. And then I said to them, okay, now how do you stack up against your competitors? So although we did say that the blue ocean is not about, trying to outmatch your competitor, it's a great place to start if you start to think about where you are and where your competitors are. And maybe blue ocean is saying, well, you know what? As a quantity surveyor, I'm just going to focus on improved cost control and the quality of my reports. That's the thing that's going to make me stand out. Or as you can see on this pink line here, competitor 3 goes, we're going to be better in terms of response time. So I don't want to contradict what I said earlier about not getting obsessed by the competition, but I do think it's important when you're mapping out your industry canvas that you think about where you are relative to everybody else, Dan.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. Now, obviously, there's several layers to this conversation. We're really discussing value proposition, looking at the canvas, looking at the blue ocean strategy. We started off looking at the segmentation. Now, ultimately, how can we, or what are some of the ways in which we can put this together into, I know like you have a marketing health checklist, how can we, what can we take away? What can we build upon here? Because there's different levels and different depths to which each business leader or organization will need to go, but there's common things we all need to do, right?
So typically when we're working with clients, we often start with this piece that we're finishing with, Dan, which is the health check. And it doesn't just talk about branding and corporate identity and your advertising budget. It also asks questions around culture and competencies and structures. So let me give you some questions. This comes from Professor Malcolm MacDonald, UK-based Chartered Institute marketing professor, brilliant. And he says you've got to think about 4 things when you are looking to assess the health of your organization or your services from a marketing point of view. Your marketing structure and segmentation, your differentiation, your scope, and your value capture. So, I mean, we can send anybody who wants this, Dan, we can send them this questionnaire, but let me just whiz through it quickly. Market structure, have you defined it? Have you mapped it? Are your segments clearly described and quantified? And have you identified the need? So that talks very much to where we were in the beginning of this webinar, and you would give yourself a score out of 10 on each of those. You'd then move to differentiation. Are you clearly and quantifiably different in terms of satisfying needs? And have you identified opportunities and threats? Again, 2 scores out of 10. Scope, have you classified the segments? Have you set objectives in terms of volume, value, market share, profitability? Have you got strategies in place in terms of the marketing mix, products, price, place, service? And have you identified key issues for action within all departments, clearly spelled out? I remember doing this with a big banking client here in South Africa, Dan, and we identified that one of their biggest issues from a marketing point of view was the perception around frontline security in the branch. So, the security guy said to me, I'm not a marketer. And I said to him, you know what? If you are the person and your team is the first person that people come into contact with in the branch, and they are not market oriented in the way they deal with customers, you have a problem. So it was a great example of taking non-marketers and getting them to think about how they can become more customer oriented.
Right.
And then the last piece is around value capture. Are you developing objectives and strategies that will add up to profitable goals? And of course, does your budget follow from that? So typically when we go through this exercise, Dan, and people get a score somewhere between 0 and 120, they get a really good assessment of how healthy they are from a marketing point of view and what they then could do about that to correct that using some of the strategy principles that we've spoken about today. So there we go. We've looked at stakeholders, we've looked at differentiation, and we've looked at some of the culture and competencies and structural issues that would help us to begin to look at some of these strategic questions. Maybe we've got time just to talk about strategic priorities, Dan.
Yeah, I think so, because I think that there's so much depth and breadth of activity here, but I think those strategic priorities would be really helpful.
So number one would be to ask ourselves, have you got clear marketing objectives? This could be growing market share, it could be determining profitability, it could be raising profile, it could be brand awareness. You've got to focus. I think you've heard Dan say that you've got to focus on really clarifying the question, why would I buy from you as opposed to somebody else? And not falling into the me too trap. You've got to pull towards the future. So right now, even as we sit in the post-pandemic era or in the midst of the pandemic, thinking about what a post-COVID world would look like from a marketing point of view is really important. And then you've got to make the hard calls. Maybe there are things you are doing which are not adding value, which need to be eliminated. Maybe there are parts of your value chain which need to be raised in terms of service quality. Maybe there are things that have to be reduced in terms of turnaround time. That may mean training, it may mean more awareness, but you've got to make those hard calls if you're serious about this. And then you've got to look at where are you vulnerable. So I've given you a personal example for me that right now, as a company that positioned itself really well in terms of the online space, what was a strength maybe 5 years ago is now a potential vulnerability because it is no longer a differentiation. So, we're busy working hard to say, what else can we do to reinvent how we go to market and make sure that we are staying, ahead of the game. And then I think it's important that you give everybody in the team practical and concrete guidance as to what that blue ocean strategy is going to require, particularly around the elimination, the reduction, the raising, and the creation of your offering, so that everybody's aligned, everybody's on the same page. And I think certainly, Dan, what we could do in our collaboration together is find ways to help people start with some of the strategic questions. And what I love about what we're proposing today is that in working with Bough Leadership Institute and Wonderful, we could take them right from strategic ideation right through to execution of that marketing strategy and beyond into monitoring and evaluation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to wrap up, and there's so much meat in that, and I want to encourage anyone that's listening on the live or those that are going to listen to the webinar to go back and unpack some of these sections yourself, because this is really future-proofing your business, your organization, but not only sort of protecting what you've had, but it's moving into the new normal. It's moving into what your organization will look like this year, next year, 3 years, 5 years time. And it's such a key time to do it. I mean, we're working hard with our clients and of all shapes and sizes at helping them to understand that the way things are moving forward is not the way things are 6 months ago, 12 months ago. The whole global economy has shifted. People's psychology has shifted. And so we've got to learn to move with it. And that doesn't mean we're all starting new businesses or organizations. What it means is we've got to find our new strategy, our new proposition and positioning, which means we've got to go back and do some of the work that Andy's been talking about throughout the session. So please listen to this session, look at those priorities. If you look at priority 1 and think, I'm done, I'm stuck, then bring in Andy, bring in Wonderful. Let's work together on it. And let's actually help move your organization, your business forward. The worst thing is analysis paralysis, where you look at it, you analyze it, and you just go round in circles by yourself. That's number one thing not to do right now. Number 2 thing not to do right now is ignore it, and just hope it will go away and things will be okay. I don't think that's the case. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we know that's not the case. And number 3, I think it's really about working with trusted partners. So if you've got people within your organization that you can trust and talk to, work with them, empower your teams to answer these questions, but be honest. Be really honest with yourself. I mean, as Andy shared about his organization, in my organization, in Wonderful, we've been really honest. What things do we do that are basically commodity Me Too products that the only way I can compete on is price? That's the reality. Within 2 miles of where I'm sitting, or 2 kilometers, whichever way you reason, from where I'm sitting, there are probably 15 other companies that can do 60% of what I do. So we focus on the 40% that they don't do. It's as simple as that. I say it sounds simple. I don't want to make it sound simple, but we've worked hard and done the hard yards applying the things that Andy's been speaking about today. So I really want to encourage you, listen to this webinar, connect into us, and really develop your own blue ocean and marketing strategy. And we want to see you guys hugely successful. So Andy, I want to just thank you for your time, your insight,
Thanks, Dan.
communication, fantastic clarity. Yeah, and thank you again for just being part of the journey with us.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I just want to wish everybody the success that they need to be able to implement these principles of marketing strategy.
Great. Have a great day, the rest of you.